Most organizations, when they add multi-factor authentication, quietly believe they have solved the identity verification problem. You need something you know, the password, and something you have, the phone. An attacker who steals the password still cannot get in without the phone. An attacker who steals the phone still cannot get in without the password. It is the simplest possible version of defense in depth, and it genuinely raises the cost of account compromise. It does not make verification unbypassable, and the reason it doesn't is not a flaw in multi-factor authentication specifically. It is a structural property of how verification works that applies to every mechanism: passwords, hardware keys, biometrics, certificates. Here is the thing to understand about verification. Verification does not confirm that you are the person an identity belongs to. It confirms that whoever is making the request has the right artifact, the right credential, the right token, the right code. The security rests entirely on the assumption that only the legitimate subject can have that artifact. Attackers do not need to break that assumption directly. They need to find a point in the system where the artifact can be obtained, relayed, or bypassed without the subject's involvement, and then they do not need to defeat verification at all. They just need to pass it. There are 5 ways this works in practice. Each one targets a different point in the verification chain, and together they explain why well-configured MFA still fails in real environments, regularly, at scale. Before the bypass techniques, it is worth being precise about what verification is doing, because understanding the structure is what makes the bypasses make sense. Verification is a point-in-time event. A credential is presented, checked against a record, and if it matches, the system issues a session token. From that point forward, the session token is what identifies you to every subsequent request. The password and the MFA code are not rechecked on every request. They were checked once at the start. The token is the proof that that check happened. This is a deliberate design. Re-authenticating on every request would be unusable. But it means the security of the entire session depends on 2 things: the integrity of the initial verification event and the confidentiality of the session token after it is issued. Attack the initial verification event and you obtain a legitimate token through a compromised process. Attack the session token after it is issued and you skip the verification event entirely. Every bypass technique maps to one of those 2 targets. Keep that in mind as we go through them. The most technically complete bypass is the adversary in the middle attack, and it is worth spending time on because it defeats MFA in a way that surprises people when they first understand it. The attack works like this. The attacker sets up a proxy, a server that sits between the victim and the real service. The victim is sent a phishing link that points to the proxy rather than the real site. The proxy looks identical to the real site. The victim enters their username and password. The proxy immediately forwards those credentials to the real site and logs in on the victim's behalf. The real site responds by asking for the MFA code. The proxy displays that prompt to the victim. The victim enters their MFA code. The proxy forwards it to the real site. Authentication succeeds. At this point, the real site issues a session token to the proxy. The attacker captures that token. The victim is redirected somewhere innocuous and never knows anything went wrong. Notice what happened. The MFA code was real. It was entered by the legitimate user. The authentication event was genuine. The attacker did not need to know the password or the MFA code in advance. They relayed both in real time. What they captured is the session token that was issued after successful authentication. The verification was not bypassed. It was completed by the legitimate user, and the output of that completion was stolen. Toolkits that automate this attack are publicly available. They require no specialized knowledge to operate, and they work against every time-based one-time password implementation, authenticator apps, SMS codes, email codes, because none of those mechanisms protect against real-time relay. The second pattern requires no technical sophistication at all. Push notification MFA, where authentication triggers a prompt on your phone asking you to approve or deny, has a structural vulnerability that has nothing to do with cryptography. A victim whose credentials have already been compromised will receive unsolicited approval prompts whenever an attacker attempts to log in. If an attacker sends enough prompts, dozens, over hours or days, some percentage of users will eventually approve one. accidentally, out of frustration, because they think it is a system glitch, because they just want it to stop. This has been the confirmed initial access method in several significant breaches, including attacks against major technology companies with security teams that knew what MFA fatigue was. The fix is straightforward in principle. Require number matching, which forces the user to type a code displayed on screen rather than simply tapping approve, but the attack exploited the gap between how push notifications were designed and how humans actually respond to repeated interruptions. SMS-based MFA routes the authentication code to a phone number. The security assumption is that only the legitimate account holder controls that number. SIM swapping attacks break that assumption by convincing a mobile carrier to transfer the victim's phone number to a SIM card the attacker controls. The carrier is the verification point, and carriers authenticate the request using information that is often available from prior breaches, social media, or social engineering. Once the number is transferred, every SMS code intended for the victim arrives on the attacker's device. This is why SMS is considered the weakest form of MFA. The security depends not on cryptography the attacker has to break, but on a human process at a carrier that the attacker can manipulate. The fourth pattern skips the verification event entirely by targeting what the verification event produces. After a user authenticates, the session token is stored somewhere accessible to the browser, a cookie, local storage, a header that gets attached to every subsequent request. Malware running on the endpoint can extract that token directly from memory or storage. Cross-site scripting vulnerabilities can expose it through the browser. A compromised network endpoint can capture it in transit if transport layer security is misconfigured or stripped. Once an attacker has the session token, they do not need the password or the MFA code. They inject the token into their own browser, and from the server's perspective, the session is legitimate. The original authentication event happened. The token was properly issued. There is nothing in the token itself that proves the legitimate user is still the one holding it. This is the structural consequence of session-based authentication that we identified at the start. The token is the identity for the duration of the session. Whoever has the token is treated as the authenticated subject. Token theft is increasingly the preferred method of attackers who have the ability to run code on a target endpoint because it bypasses every authentication control simultaneously. No password needed, no MFA needed, just the token. The fifth pattern does not attack the primary authentication path at all. It walks around it. Account recovery flows. The path a user takes when they have lost access to their credentials are a parallel authentication path. They are designed to be usable by someone who has lost their normal means of verification, which means, by definition, they use different evidence, a backup email address, a phone number, security questions, a support ticket, a government ID upload. In most systems, account recovery is secured at a lower assurance level than primary authentication. The reasoning is user experience. Someone who has lost their authenticator app should be able to recover their account without needing to physically visit an office. The consequence is a back door that is easier to exploit than the front one. An attacker with some knowledge of the victim, their secondary email address, their phone number, answers to predictable security questions, can often initiate a recovery flow and successfully reset both the password and the enrolled MFA device. At that point, they control a freshly provisioned identity that belongs to someone else, with no trace of what the original credentials were. The attack does not defeat MFA, it replaces everything that MFA was protecting. These 5 patterns look different on the surface. One uses a proxy. One uses phone calls to a carrier. One steals browser cookies. One sends relentless push notifications. One talks to a support team, but they share a single structural property. None of them need to be the legitimate subject. They only need to obtain the artifact the system accepts as proof of the subject. Verification systems are designed to check artifacts, credentials, tokens, codes, because they have no way to directly verify the subject. That is a fundamental constraint, not a design flaw. You cannot build a remote authentication system that verifies the human rather than the credential they hold. The best you can do is make the artifact harder to obtain, bind it more tightly to the specific hardware or biometric of the legitimate user, and shorten the window during which a stolen artifact remains useful. Hardware-bound credentials, where the private key never leaves a specific device and cannot be extracted, address the relay and theft patterns directly, because a relayed or stolen credential from a hardware-bound system cannot be used on a different device. This is why passkeys and FIDO2 hardware keys are resistant to adversary-in-the-middle attacks in a way that TOTP codes are not. But hardware binding does not address the account recovery problem, and it does not address MFA fatigue because both of those target the process around verification rather than the cryptography inside it. MFA is worth deploying. The cost of account compromise genuinely goes up when it is in place, and attackers do move to softer targets when the marginal cost increases. But the framing of MFA as a solution to the verification problem is wrong in a specific way that matters. It raises the cost of some attacks. It has no effect on others. And the attacks it has no effect on are the ones that understand verification is a point-in-time event that produces a reusable token, and that the token is a more valuable target than the credentials that produced it.